Prehistoric swords. Even in prehistoric days, people would scroll pictures of animals on the walls of their caves. Quote, "The men moved noiselessly through the forest, eyes and noses focused on the fresh wild boar droppings, their fire-hardened spears ready and heavy in their hands, their animal skin clothes itched on their lean, sinewy bodies, sweating now under a noonday sun, their faces blackened by campfires. The leader of the group was Oman, 39, already old by their days. The group today being 6 experienced hunters, though Thapo, the youngest, limped badly, gored earlier by an angry boar's razor-sharp tusks. This sally into foreign territory was a new venture for them, hunger making them reckless, their little ones crying for food. Avoiding others' territory, they moved silently and invisibly within the dense forest. The reeds in the pools nearby swayed in the soft, warm breeze, their calf-height shoes treading on clay and sand, and far off they heard the distant sounds of crashing tidal water sluicing in from the open sea. The hunters climbed a nearby hill, the highest only point for miles around, their keen eyes searching for the slightest movement. Hearing rooting sounds from below the hill, Oman signalled for the group to come slowly down the deep mound they stood on, dormant now, but full of the future promise of history and monastic eminence. Focus on the folks. The first visitors to swords were a post-glacial Stone Age people, finding their furtive way through the long scar of the Ward Valley, or most likely paddling their way from the accessible coast into the distantly forested interior. Settlement from the sea certainly occurred on Ireland's east coast very early on, a gap in the mountains surrounding Ireland, as in the Mount Sandal settlement at Coleraine in Northern Ireland, discovered in the 1970s. The estuary of the Bann providing an entry into the interior in this case. Something similar may have happened with our local river, the River Ward. These Neolithic hunter-gatherers may have arrived here in a post-glacial area some 8,000 years ago, settling along rivers, clearing spaces within the forest, and living by hunting, fishing or foraging. The Ward River was in permanent flood then, unconfined by any barrier, and its water lapping at the foot of St. Columba's Hill and the 3 high points off it. Thick forest enclosed the whole area, the high ridge that was to become the main street in Norman days, just another path leading into the interior wilderness and down to the sea. Fingal today has few original forested areas, the result of the intensive arable farming which began here with the Anglo-Norman colonisation in 1170. These folk recognised that this land of Fingal, once cleared, could become highly fertile and productive growing area. These Anglo-Normans were serious about their investment in Ireland, and some historians have calculated they invested over €3 billion in their castles and other settlements that they made. Prehistoric swords. The few paths and sandy lanes that were the swords of that early day would have been unrecognisable to us today. Native trees like ash, birch, willow, alder, pine, sally and oak would have abounded in the area, spreading a dense green canopy over the 4 high hills of Main Street. The biggest change, however, would have been in the deep marine estuary connecting Swords to the sea. This whole area would have been tidal, the Ward River flooding far and wide on both sides. Boats may have been needed just to get around the many deep pools and the marshy, sucking sand. Ancient Ballyheiry, Lissenhall and Seatown. Now, imagine the whole area of Ballyheiry, Seatown and Lissenhall playing pitches as part of an inland coastal land, covered in a mixture of marine and land-based plants. Once adapted to the semi-marine environment, these grew abundantly around the tree-covered mounds and hillocks scattered across the terrain. A deep water channel led from the Malahide estuary right into the heart of Swords, rather like the estuary we see today in nearby Turvey Reserve. This is how Swords looked in those very early days. Amazing to say, but off Main Street, you can now see a shell midden or ancient hunter's dump, the remains of an ancient man's coastal picnic here. Imagine seeing this set into a wall just off Swords Main Street. This is strong evidence the river came right up to Swords. The floodplain of the river ward would have extended down past the village, almost to the Malahide estuary. Hunters or foragers would have moved cautiously through the dense undergrowth, clad in animal hides and wearing hide shoes tied by bone sinews, carrying heavy spears, their dogs at their side. They trod the same ground as bargain hunters now do in the Pavilion shopping centre. The senses of these early hunters was preternaturally acute, their bony bodies always tensed for action. Squealing wild boars often crashed past them, alarmed by the intruders present. Shells left by dying shellfish mixing with the glacially depolated till would have been found all over the Swords area. The Broadmeadow River, too, would have played its part in forming the landscape here, its cool fresh water flooding into this estuarine, salty environment. Focus on the folks, but let me tell you how the site of the future Swords village looked in those far-off days. The retreat of the glaciers had left its mark on this area, now facing it firmly between land and sea. Remember, these ancient walls of ice were some 10,000 feet high, and though they moved glacially slow, you can imagine just what an impact they had on the land. Effectively, it was their slow, grinding and scraping movements that created the lie of the land around Swords, with its distinctive hilly and bumpy ridges you encounter every day. We all daily walk up and down these hillocks, unaware of their glacial origins. With the passage of time and the process of silting up, places once located on the coast can become stranded far inland. Such was the case with Swords, which even in the 18th century had its own port, with close connections to the village. For much of its early life, Swords was, loosely speaking, a coastal town abutting the open sea. Medieval authorities have pronounced that back in those times, the level of coastal water was some 15 feet higher than it is today. Conceivably then, water may even have lapped right up to the castle walls. In earlier times we speak of, the level might have been even higher. I'm pretty sure that the Ward River would have been much more navigable than it is today. It is likely, in fact, that close access to the sea was one of the main attractions Swords held for the later Anglo-Norman colonisation. Animals abounded in this area, wild boars, deer, and the seas and rivers were full of salmon, trout, shellfish, bass and flounder. We know that fish figured highly in the diet of both prehistoric peoples and the continental Normans, who always laid fish traps within easy reach. I myself have found some oyster cells up on the Norman Motte at Knocksedan. The Normans loved their seafood. The housing these people lived in was light and temporary, much like the folding tents we see today. Animal skins were laid over light timber frames, and all cooking was done outside. These earliest Irish people were hunters and foragers. Their diet consisted of deer, duck, boar, birds, salmon, eels, hazelnuts, fruits and berries in season. They used stone spearheads, arrow and harpoons to catch their prey. These people had to move constantly to source new prey, as farming was far into the future. Mesolithic era in Swords. Sometime around 4000 BC, more people began to actually settle in Fingal, bringing with them a tradition of farming and settlement. They seem to have settled in most coastal areas before venturing into the interior. They settled in the estuarine areas of Malahide and Rogerstown, living in close proximity to the sea. In the small forest clearings they made in Fingal, they grew crops such as wheat, barley, oats and corn. They also introduced domesticated animals such as horses, sheep, goats, pigs and donkeys. The diet of these people was very varied, including dairy and cereal, fruits and vegetables. These folk used stone tools to clear trees and to move further into the interior of the country. One of the most astounding evidence I have found in my explorations around Swords are the many stone remains which I found located near the river and within the forest areas. These give strong indications that ancient man was settled here and using these tools to promote a better quality of life. Settlements at this time were much more permanent, as in the Cage of Feeds in County Mayo. Their houses often had stone walls roofed over with reeds or branches. Having a consistent food surplus throughout the year freed these people to develop crafts like pottery making and also to engage in large community building projects such as the massive achievements of Newgrange and Nowt. Their dead were very important to these people. They used a lot of their resources in erecting huge stone monuments in memory of them and as places of continuing communal ritual activity. These buildings are called portal or wedge tombs, and there are many of them to be seen along the Boyne today. Back to nature. One consistent theme down all the years I've noted in Swords has been its people's very close attachment to animals and nature. In the 19th and early 20th century, the farms around Swords would have had the usual complement of domestic animals needed for arable cultivation: plough horses, donkeys, dogs and fowls of all kinds. Some would have raised pigs as a cash crop, but more usually to feed the family. Of course, their lives were governed by the season, and each time of year had its own specific farming tasks, a more simple way of life many people long for in the past. Swords was a town, but it was a town surrounded by nature, and the more enterprising villagers always supplemented their basic diet with foraged game, fish or wild vegetables. Even in the 1950s, the rivers of Swords were full of fish, if only they could catch them. Also, not widely known, the Normans were the first to introduce rabbits into Ireland, prized both for their lean meat and their soft, decorative fur. Remember, the potato was only introduced into Ireland in the 16th century. What did people eat before? Well, eating was always a seasonal thing, and for many, foraging was a necessity. Bread, too, could be in short supply at any time in Swords. At one time, the town had at least 3 mills working off the River Ward, yet another service supplied at a cost to those farmers able to buy it, but enough about food for now. Swords, an undulating landscape. Where the retreating ice had raised up high mounds of boulders and clay, now became Columbus Hill and the 3 stone quarries that now stand adjacent to Main Street. The ice had also laid its mark on the whole area around Main Street today, gouging out terraces of clay and rock, which give Swords its particularly undulating character. Rome was supposed to have founded on its 7 hills, and Swords too had elevating beginnings, though tarmacadam and concrete may have concealed all the tracks of these early villagers. Far to the west sat the glacially formed high escarpment at Killeek, almost invisible beneath its dense cloak of natural forest. This glacial escarpment drives into Swords and beyond, reaching its end in the Malahide estuary. The whole character of the landscape around Swords is elevated, summiting at Bariva and falling gently back down to the sea to the east. The Rathbeal Road, Highfields, River Valley, Forest Road, Church Road and the Brackenstown Road all are elevated, forming a characterful and interesting landscape, even if somewhat hard on older pedestrians. At Clochran, this levelling off of the landscape was destined to have great future significance for Swords, providing the site of Swords' greatest industry its airport. As we've seen, human settlement then would have been confined totally to stretches of the river, the area of Swords today being totally waterlogged, its flanks covered by thick deciduous forest. The area where our village sits today was then connected closely to the Malahide estuary and to the wider floodplain of the Wall River. Tides came and went, the water flooding or receding as the weather dictated, the water laying down rich sand and clay deposits which would be useful to farmers in future times.